YouTube. Good evening and welcome to Mindful Live 259. I'm your host Nathan Springer. Thank you for being here. It is the 21st of the 7th. Yes, it is Friday, the 21st of July, in the year of our Lord 2023. Time flies whether you're having fun or not, really and truly. Time is it's inconsequential about the whole fun business. You could be having fun, you could not be having fun. Time flies either way. Trying again, Gerard Yano says. Trying again with what, sir? Yeah, so the time is speeding on. July is nearly ending, and we are here discussing a bill that recently passed through, well, again, through our parliament. So we're going to be taking a little investigation on that. Yo, Ronnie, what's the good? What's happening? How are things? Yeah, and we're going to be discussing that. So hit that like button if you're there over on Instagram. Hit that like button, double tap the screen over on TikTok. If you are viewing this on the repeat over here on YouTube, hit that like button too. Drop a comment, tell me what you think. This is, as usual, sponsored by Mindful Education, the educational institution that I run. That's how I survive out here. So if you are interested in getting homeschool style learning pods, we have those offered from preschool all the way up to CXC. Individual one-on-one tutoring, also giving you that individual attention for most CXC and KEEP subjects. If you are looking for tutors for that, you can connect with us. Mindful Education, mindful with 2 L's _education over on Instagram. Jumping into the stories though, talking about procurement here in Trinidad and Tobago. How does the government spend other people's money? You see, that's one of the problems with government spending on a whole. Government, they're not spending their own money. You see, you spending your own money is already an incentive structure for you to spend your money wisely. That's the idea behind capitalism with the free market. And you add in the bit that we got from British common law, where you have property rights. So I can own my things and I could decide how I trade my things. And the incentive structure in that is, it's mine. I don't want to lose, I want to gain. So the incentive structure is to make wise decisions. But when you go to the government and they are trading, they are spending, they are using other people's money, what is the incentive structure to make proper decisions in that? What is the incentive structure to not try to steal as much as they can? And that's the problem that people are trying to get around with the whole procurement legislation. Put some laws to protect how the government pays other people for their services. You don't just want the government to have a blank check that they could sign to anyone that they want to. Otherwise, things would go haywire. And that was the intention of the law previously. But as the law was proclaimed, the government recognized, wait. There are some errors inside of this law. We proclaimed it, but there are some errors inside of this law. And if we continue with it as is, the government would not be able to function. So they brought it back to make some changes. Let's see how that went. Imbert, 4 months to buy a drinking glass under current law. Finance Minister Colm Imbert on Thursday justified a new procurement bill by saying under the current law, it could take a state body as long as 4 months to buy an item as simple as a drinking glass. He was in the Senate piloting the Public Procurement and Disposal of Public Property Amendment and Validation Bill 2023 to amend the bill that was passed in 2015. Hyperbole and nonsense were how he dubbed opposition fears that the bill would gut TT's procurement legislation. Regarding criticism of proposals to exempt acquisitions or disposals of up to $1 million from the Procurement Act, he said a threshold has existed since 1961. He said under the Central Tenders Board Ordinance, which was kind of how they did it before. Yes, RL, what's up? How they did it before. He said under that Central Tender Board ordinance in 1961, the exemption threshold for an accounting officer's minor purchases was $10,000. It had been increased to $100,000 in 1983, $500,000 in 1984, and now $1 million since 2010. He added that threshold is subject to regulation. He said the World Trade Organization had recommended exemption thresholds in areas including aid, troops, and international agencies. Now, listen. I do not trust these global organizations. Anybody who's a common enough viewer of my content, you know, I don't trust these global organizations like the World Trade Organization. They're talking, we want to make sure no corruption is happening in the country. The global organization overseeing trade recommends some exemptions. The exemptions that the global organization recommends are aid, international aid, troops. Almost all of the time you're talking troops, it's something outside of your borders, and international agencies. I'm sorry, folks over at the WTO, that those recommendations seem very self-serving, if I might say so myself. They seem very self-serving. All the recommendations for exemptions on procurement have to deal with things that may be controlled by those global organizations themselves. But on the note of exemptions, they are going further. Imbert went on, exemptions are part and parcel of modern procurement laws. Caribbean nations of Antigua and Barbuda, Barbados, and Belize have thresholds of US 150,000, virtually equivalent to the bill's proposed 1 million TT. Imbert warned that reports from Jamaica were of a 25% decrease in the government's development programs under their national budget simply because public service accounting officers were afraid, unfamiliar, and unsure of what they should do regarding procurement rules, which impose hefty fines and imprisonment. Now, here's the thing. I don't think that's a bad thing. I don't think that's a bad thing. I think the government spends too much. The government spending less money is nearly always a positive to me. Nearly. You're telling me that in Jamaica, they spent 25% less because they were worried that they may transgress their procurement law, and somehow I am supposed to see this as a bad thing? Why? What made this a bad thing? Has Jamaica sunk? Have pirates taken over the entire of the landmass of Jamaica? Is that what happened? And you see, here's my problem with this too. The assumption here is that all of these things, including the glass of water, are on a moment's notice. Because what it means is the Procurement Act, the procurement legislation basically had a time frame of 4 months before you could recognize these things. What programs should the government spend less on? URP, CPEP, MUST, CCC, legal, outside counsel, Ministry of Education, Ministry of local government, very likely too. They need to organize how they collect those taxes. Ministry of Works spends extra money that they need to streamline. Probably every single ministry I'd say they need to spend less on. I'm not afraid to answer that question at all. Public officer knowing their limits and acting intra-virus, that's a good thing. Thank you, Wide Leather. Spend less on bloody rental of buildings. Yes, that's included also. I include all of those things in spending less. And the problem that the minister is outlining there, that the government wouldn't be able to buy a glass for water. No, the government wouldn't be able to buy a glass for water on a moment's notice. They would have to actually plan out when they're going to buy the glass of water or the glass for water. So spending less on building rentals will cost an election. Well, that's not my concern. I'm not interested in the government winning elections. So if you're asking me where the government should spend to win election, that's a different question. If you're asking me why I want the government to spend less, yeah. But you can't get things on a moment's notice. And here's the problem with that. The problem with that is our government does not do good planning. We do not have planning. You're not supposed to need everything on a moment's notice. Everything isn't supposed to be just, oh shucks, we needed. One of the examples they drew up was they needed toner. You don't want it to be that if you need toner for printing, it's going to take 4 months. Listen, printing isn't something that shocks a government office. They know that they need toner on a regular basis. Very likely you have a schedule of when you purchase toner. You're trying to tell me that you can create a plan around your purchasing of printing equipment to be such that you don't have to do it on a moment's notice? Really? Planning isn't their forte. I was shocked how they did CARICOM. You mean nobody was planning it? Exactly. It already takes months for us to get toner in hospital. And you see, that's the thing, Michelle Sudan. The solution for this isn't to undo the legislation, to make it easy. Gerard, ease me up. The solution for this isn't to undo the legislation, to make it easy to continue in the unplanned way. No, the solution is to leave the legislation as is and fix your planning problems. That's the solution there. He detailed at length how a procurement procedure inclusive of pre-qualifying period for an item as simple as a drinking glass could take up to 4 months. He said it could not be the case that one had to wait 4 months just to buy toner for a photocopier. And I find that argument dishonest. I find the argument dishonest. Because you don't have to wait 4 months to buy toner. You just have to plan your purchase 4 months ahead. And here's the thing that screams very strange about this to me. The government is supposedly run on a budget that is outlined at the start of the financial year. How can you create a budget at the start of the financial year if you have no idea what you are going to purchase through the course of the year? How? And Mr. Gerard, the reason that I said give me an ease up with the wrong conversation and the red herring, etc., etc. If you think you know which conversation is the right conversation to be had, have the conversation in a live and see if anyone is interested in listening and looking at it. Please don't come here and try to dictate how the conversation is supposed to go and what the right conversation is supposed to be. Please don't do that. Michelle Sudan says when managerial positions are politically based, change happens very quickly. No wonder nothing gets done. Says every election is a new permanent secretary, no engineer, new this, new that. So how can plans work? Keston says, I don't think they don't have an idea, but things are complex, uncertain, etc. So how could you have a budget for a ministry if you don't know what you need to purchase during the course of the year? That's all I'm saying. And the example he used were drinking glasses and toner. I mean, I would suppose if you're trying to push this argument, this is a debate in Parliament, the foremost debate halls of our country. This is where this debate took place. So I'd suppose you'd proffer your best argument. And he said drinking glasses and toner. Are you telling me that drinking glasses and toner are things that cannot be foreseen at the start of a year and you have a certain budget already allotted for that? Toner. That is, toner in an office, toner will be one of the most predictably used things. If you run an office, if you work in an office, if you work anywhere around an office for long enough, you know that those things actually get to an average. They work out to an average. You would know how much toner this office generally uses per year. And the way how government functions, if the office uses 10 cases of toner per year, the government would order 20. That's just how government does business in nearly all areas. So you're trying to tell me you have your plan to buy 20 toner at the start of the financial year. You cannot put in place the plan to put the procurement in place to buy that toner in February. You can't put that in place back in November. That's impossible. Come on. Toner, drinking glass, those were the examples that the minister used. I am not bringing these examples up myself. These were the examples that the Minister of Finance used. Now, the next example he went into made more sense to me. Now, this is an argument that kind of makes sense. Well, Imbert lamented that a child in need of urgent surgery might apply to the Children's Life Fund, but this facility was subject to procurement rules. He said if the child needed to be treated at a hospital, such as in South America or the US, the hospital must first pre-qualify and register under the Procurement Act, which he did not think they would wish to bother to do. That is an example we need to look at urgently, he said. Are you going to tell a hospital in Miami, produce your audited financials and we'll not let you deal with a child with a hole in his heart? And yeah, that makes sense, because part of the procurement legislation is you have to register with the procurement board. And I think this is something that, you could look at. You could look at something like this where it comes to international companies and have a different kind of registration, a different kind of weighing level for international companies, because obviously international companies wouldn't all be registered with Trinidad and Tobago's procurement board. But I believe nonetheless there are ways to verify international companies too. So again, this may be a bit of a misdirection. RL says, you see, the problem is if an emergency arises that pulls away the budget from buying those glasses. Well, RL, then you could tell me that what you want to create in your procurement legislation is a clause in case of emergency. And I haven't read the entirety of this legislation, but I'm reasonably certain that this legislation would have a clause in case of emergency. And these are parliamentarians, just as they did now. They are saying that there was an emergency with the CARICOM thing, so they're retroactively exempting it. They could do that in the case of an emergency. If an emergency came up and they had to spend money, they would spend money and then go to Parliament and explain it. That's a BS excuse. That excuse doesn't stand up because that's not actually how they function. Michelle says, listen, they can make provisions for health emergencies, toner and glasses, and not emergencies. Exactly. You can make provisions for emergencies. I don't think that stands up. Imbert noted that the Coast Guard vessels need constant upkeep, and so under a restrictive procurement regime could be out of service due to acquisition problems for items as trite as a seal, ring, or screw. An entire vessel can be immobilized because it needs a ball bearing. And again, I think there's a little dishonesty being played inside there. I think. We're talking procurement legislation, Bali. We're talking procurement legislation where the government had this procurement legislation and then they brought it back to reset it because they said there were some mistakes in it that they cannot work with as is. It would grind the government to a halt. But here they're talking about the Coast Guard. Here the Coast Guard, they may have vessels, so the maintenance of those vessels may be needed. And I don't buy that, because one, you're talking about emergency maintenance if you're talking about it's being down in that case. And generally speaking, how watercraft go is there's planned maintenance for those vessels. Coast Guard vessels don't run, and then when you hear something knocking in the engine, you pull in by the mechanic. That's not generally how large ocean-going vessels are run. There are planned times for maintenance and dry dock. So again, I could believe that there can be clauses for emergency, and other than that, scheduled maintenance is scheduled, as in there's a plan. There's a plan, you know you're going to do this. So to tell me that you can't have this in place with 3 months, 4 months ahead of time, I just don't buy it. There was even more than that. Caribbean Airlines, CAL, needs procurement exemption, says Imbert, to be able to operate. Caribbean Airlines will have to be exempt from the procurement regime, or else it would not be able to operate. Prior to the proclamation of the act, the Caribbean Airlines used the tendering process for all products or services, which required an investment of over US $100,000. Based on the act, many of our processes now require special guidelines, then senior management approval prior to submission, and then approval by the OPR due to the specialized nature of our industry, Imbert said. Imbert said the areas that now require exemption include airport and aircraft leases, fuel contracts, aircraft maintenance, and pilot training. Caribbean Airlines is now flying to all sorts of destinations, but because they are a public body, a wholly owned state enterprise subject to the act, every one of these things, buying fuel, they land in Miami, they buy fuel, they land in New York, they buy fuel, they go to Toronto, and they have to engage ground handling services, different suppliers in each destination for different things. According to the act, every one of these things now has to be with a supplier that is registered with the procurement depository and pre-qualified and has gone through the tender process, the 20 days of bidding, and also the standstill period and so on. Obviously, we will have to do some sort of conditional exemption for Caribbean Airlines as it flies. Otherwise, Caribbean Airlines will just stop flying, he said. The thing is, two parts to this. Maintenance on government vehicles are outsourced, and the process it has to go through is long. There are two parts to this to me. One, again, airlines fly on a planned route, generally speaking. No Caribbean Airlines flight reaches to some city that Caribbean Airlines didn't expect they were going to reach to for a considerable period of time before. You know, it's not something that is just thrust upon them as a surprise. So, one, I think you could still plan ahead, one. And two, I think this also exposes just the very nature of the problem of the government being involved in private business. We saw this again previously with the Dragon Gas deal, where the government has to go and discuss business. They're spending our money, they're using our money, but they have to keep it a secret because, you know, this is serious business we're discussing, so we cannot relay the information in regards to the negotiation. What? It's my money. It's my money. But that's the problem when we have this more socialist leaning, the side where the government owns so many companies. The state is a businessman in Trinidad and Tobago. And the problem when the state is a businessman, is the state is using other people's money and may now be trying to function like an independent businessman on the market. When what's this Virgin Airlines guy, Branson, goes and he makes deals as the owner, chairman or whatever of Virgin Islands, I don't know what he is right now, but when he was whatever he was with the airlines, that's a different thing. He's aiming to maximize his own profit. No one has to worry if he's going to try to sell out Virgin Islands to the highest bidder. No. Generally speaking, he is trying to pay the cheapest for fuel. He's trying to make good money. But when the state is the owner of this business, and when they pay for something, they use our money, but when they make money, it goes to them. And they could pay for something and pay their friends. It makes the whole business setup tedious. It's a very difficult thing to do. Some business has to be kept confidential, especially negotiating billions. I don't disagree, Mr. That's kind of the point I am saying. I say that's the problem with government, the state being involved in those businesses in the first place. You see, if you're a private citizen, to keep your private business private makes sense. But when you are the state, you're using my money, and then you're saying you're going into private business and you're going to keep the private business private, although you're using public funds, something doesn't seem to quite add up. Michelle says no government owns anything. They are in charge to manage people's resources. Problem is governments feel they own it. You see, that's the problem with the leftward leaning belief. That's the problem with socialism. That's the problem with communism. That's the problem with the unions. Because unions are kind of left leaning. The idea of a collectivist group where, you know, the workers of the country unite. Those with the sickle and those with the hammer, we unite together to run this country. Okay, but all 1.4 million Trinidadians can't actually own Caribbean Airlines. We can't make the decisions for Caribbean Airlines. So although Caribbean Airlines is wholly state-owned, it's supposed to be owned by all 1.4 million Trinidadians. Okay, but we can't actually actively, in effect, in reality, own it. So we hire people, put them there to manage it on our behalf. So what ends up happening is they effectively own it. No, it's not on their name, but on the day-to-day, when you're determining how the money is spent, they determine that. When they're determining the salaries, they determine that. Yeah, so for all intents and purposes, they own it. Although it's stated that it's our property. It's like the same thing that many of those international conglomerates like BlackRock and those money controllers do. They don't own things themselves. The country's national insurance fund, the pension fund from this state, from that country, this country's entire savings fund, basically, we don't know what to do with all of this money. So here's what we're going to do with this money. We give BlackRock, which is a financial group, they know how to invest money. And now BlackRock is in control of $10 trillion. It's not their $10 trillion, but the boss at BlackRock has $10 trillion that he could point in a direction and say, spend it there. So although it's technically not theirs, they have control of it, so the power is theirs. That's why when they can't manage it, we fire them after their contract up. But you see, the problem is we can't fire all of them. We can only exchange them, and there's a limited group we can exchange them with, and they select who are in the group that we can exchange them with. So firing them every 5 years is like, imagine I have a bucket full. For those people out there who know something about vehicles, I have a bucket full of spark plugs, and they're all bad. And every drive I make, I could switch out my 4 bad spark plugs and exchange them for some of the bad spark plugs inside of the bucket. Yeah, I could switch out the bad ones I have, but I mean, it's the same bucket I'm picking them up out of. This feels so depressing, spinning top in mud. Yes, it can feel depressing. And to me, I think it's important to understand the illusions inside of politics, so that you don't get your hopes up on some politician or some political party, because that isn't a sensible thing, really and truly. Moving on from what Imbit was saying, though, some of the independent senators had some things to say about that. Independent senator criticizes new procurement bill. Independent senator Shri Sipasad spoke against the public procurement and disposal, yada yada yada, saying it's as watering down TT's procurement legislation rather than the bill altering the Public Procurement and Disposal of Property Act. She said bodies in the public sector must up their game. She was making the same point I was making. Instead of watering down the act, we need to up our game. Don't water down the act because the public service is incompetent at coming up to the act. No, increase the skill in the public service to be able to keep up with the act so that people could trust the public service. C. Prasad said that for the bill to give the finance minister sole responsibility would contradict the act's goal of accountability. She calculated that a full working act could save the state $3 to $9.2 billion from corruption based on data from the Organization for Economic Cooperation. Now, let's look at the high end of what the independent senator said here. $9.2 billion could be saved by the state if we go along with this Procurement Act and cut out a good level of corruption. But here's the thing. That 9.2 billion that the state would save would actually be 9.2 billion that some people would be losing. If the state saves that money, $9.2 billion that would have been in the pockets of someone else would be lost. And you would be an ignoramus to assume that 9.2 billion goes missing in corruption from the state and they had no idea who it went to. No, I don't buy that. I don't buy that. They know where they know the cracks that the money falls through, and they don't want to seal those cracks. They know the holes that all the coins are rolling through. They don't want to seal those holes. C. Prasad said it was not flattering that the Transparency International Corruption Perception Index had ranked TT as the 77th best country out of 180 countries. That's lower than half, with TT's score of 42 on a scale from 0, very corrupt, to 100, very clean. So we actually failed it. If 50-50 is a pass, we failed that corruption scale. The economy, she said 20% of TT businesses surveyed had told TI of paying bribes for critical services. A 2019 report from the Development Bank of Latin America had found TT ranked worse than the regional average for incidents of bribery, she added. Listen, I feel that 20% was a conservative estimate. I think the amount of businesses in Trinidad that pay bribes for services that are supposed to be free or just a fee may be somewhere up 70%, somewhere there. White Leather says bribes is just another cost of doing business, most business here. Yes, as I said, I spoke to the head of the TTMA and he said he knows that there are businesses where that is a line item in their books. In their books, a line item is greasing the wheels. Corruption in Trinidad and Tobago is not on the government, that's on the society in general. You know, there was once upon a time that I kind of believed that, but then I didn't. Let me tell you one of the things that changed my mind on the idea that the corruption was just societal instead of governmental. I listened to an African billionaire, an African business person. Ziza says we allow it, okay. And I listened to an African business person and they were speaking about the corruption in Africa, similar to the corruption in Trinidad and Tobago. And they were making the point that the human beings that they encountered in Africa were not more corrupt than the human beings they encountered, for example, in the US, because they did business in both places. And in Chicago, for example, she spoke about there being rampant corruption. There are corrupt people all over. But she said that the place that the government plays in the business, the important role that the government takes in doing business, creates the incentive structure for that level of corruption. there is so much of a bureaucratic weight on doing business that it creates an incentive for corruption. So, for example, in Trinidad and Tobago now, if you pass this procurement bill, if this procurement bill is law, not if it is passed, so in order to get government contracts, now I need to sign up with this and sign up with that and register with that and register with the other. So if I want to do business in Trinidad and Tobago, I need to do about 3 months of business in various government offices. As a businessman, time is money. I would want to do everything possible to expedite that. Now, on the end of the public servants inside of those government offices, they are paid a flat salary. Whether they do it fast, slow, intermediate, they're paid the same thing. They have no incentive to allow your business to run faster. If you want to incentivize public servants to make your business run faster, you have to literally incentivize them. Militant Rockstar says British inherited bureaucracy was designed that way to foster corruption. East Indian Trading Company. I actually disagree, Militant Rockstar. I think it's when we venture away from some level of British common law and free market runnings. I think a lot of the West Indies, the Caribbean, and Africa, when they left the colonial powers, they hated the colonial powers so much, a lot of them held on to more Marxist/socialist/left-wing belief in how things are run. There are lots of state companies in Trinidad and Tobago. The state owns a lot of the employment in Trinidad and Tobago is by the state. That creates perverse incentives inside of the country. That's what creates a lot of the corruption inside of the country. The incentive is that in order for things to run, we have to create a free market on top of the state run non-free market. So that's where the bribes come in. So I don't think that Trinis are born with a more corrupt gene than Americans are born with. I don't believe that. I think that humans in general are given to trying to work around to get things to function in the way that they want. And if you create a maze that you're causing people to jump through hoops to get through the maze, they would see to climb over the wall if they could. That's just human behavior. I don't think it's naturally innate corruption. And the system that we have created, we have engineered a system that is comfortable running on that corruption now. It's comfortable running on that corruption. It's the expected way. So beside it being incentivized, now after it has been incentivized for decades, it is now entrenched. So this is kind of how it's supposed to run. It's expected to run that way. Like when you go for your license, you pay for it. How else do you get your license? Going on with what the independent senator was saying. The economy can only survive and grow if the waste is diminished and eventually eliminated altogether. Procurement regulation, therefore, must not be diminished or watered down for the sake of convenience and expediency. Further, giving a minister sole responsibility for seeking the public's interest as far as these amendments are concerned is contradictory to what the Act seeks to accomplish: transparency in public affairs. So ultimately, the amendments that they are making now gives the finance minister power over procurement. And what sense does that make now? What sense does that make? Exactly, Michelle Sudan. Exactly. Regarding the bill's proposal of exemption of up to 1 million, she warned, there are no measures to prevent the splitting of contracts. Sipasad warned against comparing other countries to TT. Countries such as Australia, Canada, the United Kingdom, the United States, and Europe have threshold limits, but these countries do not have the same level of corruption that exists in TT. It is a well-known and common practice for contracts to be broken up into smaller packages to avoid tender requirements. Sipasad suggested that companies had no excuse for not registering at the OPR as required under the Act. And that's another point. They've said that, okay, we need that exemption of below 1 million. And if you do this with only the 1 million not needing to go through the procurement board, then people could just split up contracts, as is a popular practice inside of government services. It has always been. And the point she's making about comparing legislation, I agree. I always say this. I was saying there that I don't believe Trinidadians are born with a corrupt gene more corrupt than other places. But I do believe there are cultural differences between countries. There are intrinsic cultural differences that make a law that may work in the United Kingdom not necessarily work in that same form in Trinidad and Tobago. And again, as the point I was just raising is, I wonder if I could get a statistic on this. I don't have it, but if I could get a statistic on this, what percentage of corporations, of businesses that function in the United Kingdom are owned by the government or by the state, versus what percentage of companies or corporations that function in Trinidad and Tobago are owned and run by the state. And I am almost sure that that percentage in Trinidad and Tobago would be astronomical as compared to other places. So when the government is in control of so much of the business that is done in the country, procurement becomes a whole different game. When the majority of the business, the majority of the economy is all done in the free market, you don't need a whole lot of procurement legislation. As I said, the procurement assurances in the free market is that people don't want to lose money. There are a lot of companies that are not registered in Trinidad and Tobago. That's true. Michelle says they won't stop at 1 million. They will continue to push. A lot of companies are not paying proper taxes, etc. So that piece of legislation is frightening for them. Yes, that is true. And I understand why that is so, and again, that is symptomatic of some of the bureaucracy in Trinidad in general. But this is, if you want the government to have all of these state companies and spend this much money in their state companies, I think this is the consequence you have to pay. You just can't have the government spending public money so easily. Last couple of years, the AG happened upon powers. He's not giving up easily. When hindered, just cast it under public health ordinance. Yeah. Tony, the ambassador on registered companies getting state company contracts. No. I think City of London, the UK government, has a major interest in there. Yeah. What major interest the UK government has in the City of London? I don't know if you're talking about the monarchy, because if you're talking the monarchy owns a lot of the land that a lot of those cities are on. So that's a different thing than the government itself. I don't know how much companies and corporations the United Kingdom government, as in their house, has. I'm not sure. I don't think it's a whole lot. Similarly in the United States. So it's not like the majority. Yeah, the monarchy. And the monarchy is not the government. You could think of the monarchy kind of as a private family. The idea of a monarchy is kind of that a private family owned enough land that they own the country. That's nearly the idea of a monarchy. So a monarchy is a governance style where you're ruled by a king, but to some extent the king is the owner of the entirety of the land. So yeah, that's not the same thing that I'm talking about now in the context of a state government, a democratic government with various politicians in a bureaucratic system owning a company. That's a different thing. Yeah. I think though, but the problem is, even though you have those unregistered companies, if you want to do business with the government, you cannot just have unregistered companies doing it willy-nilly. That's not what could happen. But the thing is, in Trinidad and Tobago, unregistered companies still do business with the government on a regular. As the independent senator spoke about breaking up contracts regularly, there are subcontracts too. So a bigger contractor gets a contract and he just gives it a whole lot of unregistered companies that he pays out of his money because he's registered. He gets the main contract and they pay it out as subcontracts. So the reason a lot of those companies are unregistered is because their money isn't hurt by being unregistered. They still make their money nonetheless. And the fact is, you could be registered in Trinidad and Tobago and still you wouldn't necessarily be paying taxes, honestly, because the books for the most part are run by you. You could, according to what, especially if you're talking in the contractor sphere, especially in construction and those areas, the books are run by you. You could say how much you made, you could say how much you didn't make. You who determine if you cross the threshold to pay a certain tax, etc., etc. So even being registered isn't an assurance. But isn't that their business? Yes, it is their business to some extent. Either way, everyone going to be registered anyways, since CBDCs come into effect, total central bank control. Those CBDCs could go their merry way. I have no interest necessarily in that kind of thing. If I have CBDC, I will still attempt to run something on the outside. I have my garden, we will be bartering. I have some massive pumpkins, you bring something in exchange for the pumpkin. They could hold their central currency. I'm good. All right. Folks, it looking like tonight may be an early-ish night, eh? I'm feeling the tiredness on the voice. Keep me in mind, not pumpkin though. Well, my garden right now, the garden is producing pumpkin, cucumbers. I have some passion fruit. I have a grapevine, you know. I probably need to go check out my grapevine. My grapevine, Nathan want to be outside. Of course! You weren't plugging me into that matrix at all. My grapevine has some bunches of grapes on it at the moment. I have quite a few avocado trees. Karaili like rain. You don't have to plant karaili. That grows where it wants. And my daughter eats raw karaili. Strange little girl. I'm starting my garden soon. My cousin was looking forward to her debate. You see, Ronnie, you see... I have sweet potatoes. But that's a battle. There's a little worm, not a little worm, a massive worm that goes after your sweet potatoes. If you don't spray it continually at the right time, you're gonna be pulling up. You pull up your sweet potato and you just see a massive purple worm just wiggling through, and I'm like, oh my goodness, it hurts deeply. Quite a bit of planting. Bananas, silk banana, different varieties of banana. Yes, lots of cassava, cane obviously. Oh yeah, lots of fruits. I'm going with a lot of fruits too. So you know, all of those sugar apples, custard apples, all of that, the different kinds of sapote, the fat pork series, cherries, plums. This garden is going to be wonderful. You know, maybe I might run some mindful sessions out of the garden eventually. Full production you have going on there. Yeah, man, I want everything. Just watching and waiting for the inevitable, planning to be self-sufficient. The only thing I wish I could have in my garden, but these disgusting thieves in Trinidad and Tobago. I wish I could have had some animals out there, but you know, my garden is a distance away and no one is living there. I know if I put some goats or something out there, build my nice shed, I'm gonna come back and somebody will steal my goats. And listen, if you steal my pineapple, like I presume some immigrant workers that were working on a neighboring farm stole some of my produce before. And I mean, if you steal a pineapple, that is one thing. You see, if you steal a goat, The goat is an animal, man. I may name my goat. Me and my goat may be, kind of on a friendly basis. That's going to hurt me deep. So before I hurt my own feelings and get myself so angry, I attempt to do dangerous, reckless, and illegal things, I say, you know what? Let me not put any animals out there so the bandits don't get tempted and I don't get angry. But you see, that's the disadvantage with the crime situation in the country. People can't even invest. People can't even invest like they want to, because you always have to have in the back of your mind that some bandit out there may be wanting your stuff more than you. Where you get fat pork plants, I am pretty sure that what they call this government nursery business down in Centennial is where they call that there. In St. Augustine there now. There's a nursery in St. Augustine there. They have just about any plant you want to plant. Oh, I got some dragon fruit too. My dragon fruit flowered recently, one of my dragon fruits. No, not Namdev Co. In between on Farm Road there, between Curep and St. Augustine. Well, that's not Curep and St. Augustine. That's Curep. They call some of their St. Augustine, but the Farm Road connecting Curep back kind of to Mount Hope side there. Right there you go, and they have just about any plant. The citrus plants, you could only get 3 at a time. I have been, maximizing that whenever that opportunity comes. They have a limit on the amount of citrus plants you get, but you go in and you raid your 3 citrus plants, you plant them and you wait for the next time. You go get another 3 and you get another 3 and another 3. You get all varieties of mangoes. They're like, as I criticize the government being involved in so many different things, there are some benefits to that too. It's just that a lot of people don't seize a lot of those benefits. The idea that there's a government company that is open to the public that sells you just about any plant you want to plant in Trinidad and Tobago, both fruit and ornamental, for a very low price, $25-$30. For the maximum you would pay for any price, if it's rare, might be $20. Some plants are single digit prices and stuff. That's a beautiful thing. But I mean, of course, there are lots of social programs, seedlings, education, lots of them. Many people don't maximize them. That's why when we talk about crime, on the crime end of it, should have a government non-profit tax-free grocery. Nah. Work for food. The good book says a man who does not work should not eat, and I agree. If you want to eat, go and work. That's why regularly when we talk about crime, the idea that social programs are the solutions to crime, I don't actually buy that a whole lot, because many social programs out there, and many people are bypassing the social programs. Many people utilize the social programs to further criminal enterprises. So it's not just about opportunities, and the poor youths don't have opportunities to make money and to make a living. And no, it's not just that. We do have a lot of programs. I want to buy tax-free Hennessy. Good grief. You see again? Once a tax-free, look where you going. By the way, you could make that yourself too. I am just saying. That could be made yourself too. And homemade wine is a vibe. I've been making homemade wine a while now too. Listen. Homemade wine, jamun wine, cherry wine. They can't get me to buy yellowtail and like that anymore, Once I get all my bottles in order, forget about yellowtail. Christmas coming. Yeah, everybody come over by me. Wine could be flowing endlessly, and you're like, wow, you're balling this year, Nathan. No. I am making this year. Alright, people, it's a Friday evening, the end of a week. If there are no further If there are no further questions or comments, I'm looking to dive out there. By the way, I will be over in TIC tomorrow. If any of you would be there, Trade and Industry Convention. Come to mind, the government not even subsidizing gas again. Let me get a ease up. Ha! I will be over in TIC at the Center of Excellence down there. If you all are interested and you all are around there, hit me up. You may see me out there. Trade and Investment Convention. If not, you could see me again in the next Mindful Live, which is going to be Monday evening around 9:30 p.m. You could tune in there. You're drinking the ginger turmeric tea. I hope I drank coffee tonight. I will work on that ginger turmeric tea. I told it to the background secretary, so they will be on it. All right, people, that's all I have for now. I hope you are educated, informed, or entertained. This has been the Mindful Life. I am Nathan Spring. I will see you guys again Monday evening. Until then, what's this trade and investment? It's held by the Trinidad and Tobago Manufacturers Association. You can come and see lots of various vendors out there, different companies in Trinidad and Tobago, what they have to offer. Head down, check them out, TTMA or TIC on Instagram, I believe, and you could see what they have to offer there. All right, people, I'll see you guys later.